Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Guilty as Charged podcast. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on podcast services around the world, we are here to talk about two potential Giants players that might be made available as a result of the cap situation and new management the Giants are under. So I wanted to talk about both of these players because one of them made a particularly big impact on Chargers Twitter recently, and the other one I think is an interesting option that the Chargers may be able to pursue at some point down the road. So let's talk about both of these guys. I am, of course, talking about Saquon Barkley, the running back who kind of made a storm on Chargers Twitter this week. And I'm also talking about cornerback James Bradberry, who might be a potential cut or trade target for the Giants. But let's get into both of these guys. And I want to first start off with why is this all happening, right? Why are the Giants potentially selling all this talent and potentially looking to make trades and having a former number 2 overall pick like Barkley on the table? And I would read this paragraph over here. New York is currently projected to be $12 million over the salary cap in 2022, a major issue for GM Joe Schoen. Given how the team has struggled with that roster, he doesn't sound afraid to make a big splash in order to reshape the team, even if it involves dealing a popular player like Barkley. Shane also followed up his comments by saying, "We're still working through that, but I'm open to everything. Like whether it's trading player for player, I'll listen to everybody. If it's trading a couple players, I'm not going to say the entire roster. We're open for business on the entire roster. But if anyone is going to call and they're interested in any of our players, I'm certainly going to listen." So those are certainly some quotes that tell you that Joe Schoen and the Giants' power structure in general is willing to fire sale if they have to kind of, jumpstart this rebuild after the David Gettleman era. And then there is the Giants beat reporter from The Athletic, Dan Duggan. He said, surveying sources in Indy referring to the Combine, not the Colts, but he was saying surveying sources in Indy, the consensus trade value for James Bradberry is a 3rd round pick and Saquon Barkley is a 4th round pick. I'm skeptical that the Giants will pull the trigger on a Saquon trade, right? So I think that kind of shows you where those players are valued around the league, if the Giants really want to make those trades or if they can make those trades. So let's talk about both of these players' contract situations. Of course, we'll start with running back Saquon Barkley. He is on his 5th-year option, the last year of his contract, basically due $7.2 million. In terms of his cap hit, which is his biggest. I think that's his biggest base salary, but it's somewhere in the middle in terms of his contractual cap hits. And so that's his 5th-year option. This is pretty much his last chance to kind of get that contract extension from the Giants, or have a breakout year as a member of the team following that 2020 ACL injury. This will be his 2nd year removed from that ACL injury. So it's kind of put up or shut up, do or die time, whatever way you want to put it, for Saquon in terms of his Giants tenure, especially given the fact that there's new management there that now didn't draft Saquon originally. So I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with him, as well as if he bounces back. But I think it's pretty unlikely that the Giants actually trade Saquon Barkley, despite Keenan Allen's wishes, who of course tweeted the world famous eye emoji when there is a free agent or a trade acquisition to potentially get for a team. Players like to mess around. I like to mess around with the eye emoji on Twitter too, because I think it's fun. But I despite Keenan Allen's wishes, I do not think Saquon Barkley actually gets traded, nor do I think it makes a lot of sense for the Chargers, which I'll get to in a minute. But he, is due $7.2 million, not huge against the cap, and the Giants don't really save any money by getting rid of him. It would just be that $7.2 million, which doesn't even make up the $12 million that they need to get rid of to get under the cap. On the other hand, cornerback James Bradberry is a bit of an interesting cut candidate for them. I know the Giants were saying they're looking for a 3rd round pick to potentially deal James Bradberry. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not going to happen. And you look at these two numbers as pretty big reasons why that's not going to happen. James Bradberry's cap hit is $21.9 million this year. His dead cap is 9.8. So why, if I'm Tom Telesco or any GM really, am I going to pay the Giants a day 2 pick to absorb a $21.9 million cap hit, to have first dibs on that cap hit? And also, I can get him for not free, but I can get him for a much better contract literally a week from now after they cut him, right? This is also sort of the same thing with the Amari Cooper situation in Dallas. There's not going to be a team that trades for Amari Cooper when you know that for a value of between 10 and 16 million, that's the money the team's going to save, whether we're talking about the Giants who are going to save 12 million by cutting James Bradberry, or we're talking about the Cowboys who are going to save 16 million by cutting Amari Cooper, right? And so that's going to be the problem here for any real trade involving Bradberry. It's just not going to happen. I think that the Giants just kind of have to eat their losses there and cut him, and they end up saving money by getting $12 million back, which, as we just talked about, by being $12 million over the cap, James Bradberry alone gets you back to the break-even point in terms of the cap situation right now. So, it's kind of like the Chargers can't trade Brian Bulaga. They just have to cut him because no team is absorbing an $11, $12 million cap hit when they ultimately know that they can get him for much cheaper. And, they're not willing to spend a pick to help you make your cap situation better. And that's just the reality, I think, with trades and cuts around the NFL when it comes to numbers like Bradberry or Cooper or Bulaga, for example. So those are both of those players' contract situations. I do want to start with Saquon Barkley because this kind of became a thing on Twitter after Keenan Allen tweeted the eye emoji, and Chargers fans were debating whether or not the team kind of should sign him. Of course, Steven is the most liked reply on this tweet, where he just said, "Please no," which is why we let Steven run the account. I'm not allowed to run the account because that's giving the monkey the machine gun a little bit there. But I think that generally kind of summarized Chargers fans' feelings on it. Of course, there are some that are maybe Saquon fans and are conflicted on it. But Saquon's in a real interesting position coming back from his ACL injury, obviously. And I want to talk about his profile a little bit more in detail as for, why he could potentially be a player that a team might trade for or go after. Of course, he's in the final year of his deal, but I want to start with his rookie season. His rookie season is, of course, when he broke out and really catapulted himself into being in that top 5, top 10 running back in the league kind of group. He was number 1 in yards created in the league, which was, is just insane for a rookie player of his caliber, right? In terms of breakaway run rate, he had 6.9%. Breakaway runs are described as runs that go for 15 or more yards. Breakaway runs total, he was number 3 in the league amongst running backs that year. And you can just see that Saquon was a beast his rookie season, right? If you want to look at another stat like elusiveness, I think that's also a stat that shows you how dominant he was in that rookie season. He had the 67.4 elusiveness rating. Elusiveness, of course, is a metric that describes how evasive a player is and how slippery they are independent of their blocking, and how much they're able to get downfield independent of their blocking. And you just saw that Saquon was one of the best running backs in the league in that regard. Of course, now he's had these injuries, and it's just really eaten into his production, as we see over here, right? Had 2 1,000-yard seasons, has that ACL injury. Last year had 162 rush attempts, 3.7 yards per carry, 593 rush yards total. Of course, Saquon's not in a great situation, given, the Giants' offensive line and Daniel Jones and Joe Judge being the head coach, right? It was just a disaster season last year. But I think you've just seen that Saquon has taken a dip in a lot of these key categories we're talking about. So we just looked at his 2018 stats in his rookie season where he was super explosive. And now let's look at his 2021 stats because the numbers are not good. Breakaway run rate went down 3.8% from his rookie year. He's 44th in the league in terms of breakaway run rate. Breakaway runs, 5 total compared to 18 from his rookie year. So he just had 5 15-yard rushes. That's good enough for 39th in the league compared to 3rd, which we just talked about from his rookie year. And in terms of yards created, his efficiency dropped all around the world from his rookie year. EPA, is a stat that Arjun talks a lot about. He was 151st in the league in terms of EPA. And he's really just fallen off a cliff, unfortunately, the reality for him. And elusiveness kind of shows that he's dropped off between the tackles as well, because as much as I just said, He was great his rookie year in terms of being an elusive, powerful, fast runner. He has dropped 30 plus points in terms of his elusiveness rating from his rookie year to now. And that is something to be concerned about. Now, of course, this is to all say, like, Saquon can theoretically get better, right? Of course, he's another year removed from that ACL injury. He's still 25, 26, but it's a lot to ask for, a fourth round, maybe a third round pick for someone to take on Saquon on a 1-year deal and try to basically bet that, like, we're going to rebuild his value and he'll become an RB1 or RB2 for us. I think that's a lot to bet on given the recent history of Saquon. Of course, not in the greatest situation in New York, but one of the reasons I'm out on him is just because I think his value has plummeted. Not, of course, for his contract's not bad, but in terms of what he can actually bring a team, I don't think there's really any chance that Saquon provides much value for the Chargers, who are in win now mode, right? Of course, there are other teams that can trade for Saquon and like figure out what he is if they're not like contending this year, but the Chargers have to contend. And I think they have to find someone who can give them reliable production. Saquon just isn't that guy right now in reality. Unfortunately, never was the sharpest in between the tackles, but his athleticism has dropped off so much that I don't know if he can get it back. And that'll be the test for the Giants this year. But it's one of the reasons that I would be completely out on trading a high day 2, day 3 pick for, a running back on a 1-year deal who has had a lot of injuries over his tenure. But I do think James Bradberry is a little bit more of an interesting situation. Of course, we just talked about James Bradberry's contract and how a team can basically save $12 million, or how the Giants can save $12 million by cutting him. He's going to get cut. And he can be signed to a pretty reasonable contract. The Chargers need to be bolstering their quarterback room, whether that's through the draft, free agency, both, really. When you talk about Chris Harris leaving and Michael Davis and Asante Samuel Jr. really being the only starting quarterbacks in 2022 currently on the roster. So they definitely need to bolster the depth there. And Bradberry's had a pretty effective tenure in New York. Of course, has never lived up to that contract, but his WAR has always been decently above average, kind of hit a high in 2020 with his like sort of breakout season, if you will, with the Giants. Dipped a little bit this season in terms of WAR just because the Giants were bad in general. But overall, his WAR has been, average to above average for his career. WAR is, of course, wins above replacement. And so, I think that he adds a lot to a quarterback group if you kind of add him for a reasonable price. And he had a decent season this year and a better season in 2020. But all things considered, pretty solid corner that you could get for relatively cheap value. I don't know if you would take like a 1-year, 2-year kind of deal. His real issue is kind of run defending and tackling, but I think if you stick him on the outside, that's not something you have to worry about too much with him. Michael Davis has become a bit of a better tackler during his time here. Asante Samuel Jr. is a very good tackler. And of course, the elephant in the room is, of course, Derwin James on the defense, right? So I think he kind of mitigates that problem. The Giants also had terrible secondary talent around Bradberry most of the time. And so that kind of created a lot of pressure for him. But ultimately, I think you have someone who's a very solid in coverage corner and at least provides you a year, maybe 2 years of pretty good starting level cornerback play while the Chargers try to figure out the long term of their cornerback situation. As far as what his market value is, I'm actually not too sure what it would be. I think if you look at his market value right now, it's decently high, like it's a $10 to $12 million average salary, but he's also probably not going to get like a lot of years when he's cut. I think that he would probably get something like a 3-year, $30 million deal, 2 years, 24, but ultimately something that's a pretty reasonable contract compared to what he got from the Giants, which was 3 years, $45 million. And that contract was always an overpay, but I think, it was just revealed to be a really big overpay when he was playing good, but not to the level they expected. And it's just very obvious he's going to end up being a cut candidate given the financial situation the Giants are in. But that's kind of all I got on Saquon Barkley and James Bradberry. Of course, I am kind of out on Saquon Barkley as a whole. I don't think there's much the Chargers could do there. I think they have to go through the draft or free agency if they want to find some RB2 production. Cordell Patterson's there. There's a lot of reliable RB2s that the Chargers could potentially get for Austin Eckler. I just don't think trading Saquon is the move, or trading for Saquon is the move there at all. James Bradberry, I think, is a very interesting cut candidate, but let me know what you guys would do in the comments down below. Would you trade for Saquon? Would you trade for Bradberry? Would you see either of them, particularly Bradberry, as a cut candidate for the Chargers? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you guys next time.